Nestled in the quiet countryside of Sauk County, Wisconsin, lies the small town of Cazenovia. A place where neighbors know each other by name, and where the peaceful hum of daily life is rarely interrupted. But on the morning of September 29, 2006, this small community would be shaken to its core, its tranquility shattered by an act of unspeakable violence. Eric Hainstock, a 15-year-old boy, troubled, isolated, and boiling with resentment, walked into Weston High School armed with a shotgun and a .22 caliber revolver. What unfolded that morning would leave one beloved man dead, a town reeling with grief, and a chilling cautionary tale that echoes to this day. This is the story of Eric Hainstock, the boy who felt unseen, the warning signs that went ignored, and the fateful decisions that turned a quiet high school into a scene of tragedy. Eric Hainstock was not born a killer. He entered the world on January 4, 1991, in what should have been a fresh start for his family. But the early years of Eric's life were far from nurturing. His mother left the family when he was still young, leaving him in the care of his father, Sean Hainstock. Descriptions of their home life paint a grim picture, a household filled with tension, neglect, and frequent abuse. Eric often confided to classmates and school staff about his struggles at home. He spoke of physical abuse and emotional torment accusations that would later resurface during court proceedings. One story claimed his father once struck him with a curtain rod, leaving Eric injured and humiliated. School, which should have been a safe haven, was no escape for Eric. At Weston High School, he was the target of relentless bullying. Peers mocked him for his appearance, his demeanor, and his inability to fit in. He was an easy target, a boy who walked the halls with his head down, his body language screaming vulnerability. But the bullying didn't stop at his classmates. Eric believed he was being treated unfairly by school staff, too. He accused teachers and administrators of ignoring his pleas for help or dismissing him as just another troubled teenager. To Eric, it felt like the world was conspiring against him, and he was powerless to stop it. In the weeks leading up to September 29, 2006, Eric's behavior began to shift in alarming ways. He spoke openly about his frustrations with school and his life at home. According to court testimony, Eric once told a teacher that he was tired of being bullied and that someone was going to pay for it. What went unnoticed, or worse, ignored, were the warning signs. Eric was slipping deeper into despair. His anger, fueled by years of neglect and bullying, was building to a breaking point. He felt invisible, insignificant. And as he saw it, the only way to be noticed was to make a statement, one that no one could ignore. The morning began like any other in Cazenovia. The sun rose over the fields, casting long shadows across the quiet streets. But for Eric Hainstock, this was no ordinary day. This was the day he would take matters into his own hands. Eric woke early, his heart pounding with a mix of fear and grim determination. He retrieved a shotgun from his home, along with a .222 caliber revolver. The weapons, easily accessible, seemed to symbolize his final grasp at control in a life that felt utterly powerless. Clad in dark clothing, Eric left his house and walked toward Weston High School. The building, a small, unassuming structure, was quiet as students filtered in for another day of classes. But that calm would soon give way to chaos. Eric entered the school at approximately 8 a.m., the shotgun visibly slung over his shoulder. The sight of the armed teenager sent a wave of panic through the hallways. Students screamed and ran, the once familiar hallways now filled with fear and confusion. Principal John Klang, a respected and beloved figure in the community, was alerted to the situation almost immediately. Klang had dedicated his career to the school, and his compassion for students was well known. But on this morning, his role as an educator would transform into that of a hero. John Klang stepped out of his office and moved toward the chaos. As he approached, he came face to face with Eric Hainstock. Accounts of their exchange vary, but what is certain is that Klang attempted to de-escalate the situation, speaking calmly to the boy who had once sat in his classrooms. Eric, his emotions frayed and his grip on reality slipping, raised the shotgun. He fired. The blast echoed through the school, followed by a chilling silence. Principal Klang fell to the ground, gravely wounded. But even in his final moments he fought back. Summoning strength that defied comprehension, Klang managed to tackle Eric, wrestling the gun away and preventing further bloodshed. Other staff members quickly intervened, subduing the boy and holding him until law enforcement arrived. John Klang, the man who had dedicated his life to protecting and guiding students, succumbed to his injuries shortly after being rushed to the hospital. His death left a void that would never be filled. Eric Hainstock was arrested at the scene, his fury replaced by a chilling emptiness. For the first time, perhaps, he understood the weight of his actions. But it was too late to turn back. The Weston High School community was left in shock. The halls, once filled with laughter and learning, now bore the weight of trauma and loss. Students and teachers struggled to process what had happened. How had it come to this? John Klang was mourned as a hero, his selfless actions saving countless lives that day. Vigils were held in his honor, and his family was embraced by a community united in grief. But the focus soon shifted to Eric Hainstock, the boy at the center of the tragedy. Eric's trial began in 2007, and it was as much a trial of the system as it was of the boy himself. Prosecutors painted him as a cold, calculated killer who had planned the attack for weeks. The defense, however, presented a different story: a deeply troubled teenager pushed to the brink by years of abuse and neglect. Testimony revealed the depths of Eric's pain. Teachers, classmates, and family members spoke of the abuse he endured at home and the bullying he faced at school. Mental health experts detailed his struggles with depression and emotional instability, arguing that his actions were a desperate cry for help. But the jury was not swayed. Eric Hainstock was found guilty of first-degree intentional homicide. He was sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 30 years. Eric Hainstock's story is a chilling reminder of the cracks in our systems at home, in schools, and in society. How many opportunities were missed to help a boy who was clearly in pain? How many warning signs went ignored, dismissed as mere teenage angst? For the residents of Cazenovia, the tragedy left scars that may never fully heal. John Klang's sacrifice remains a beacon of courage, a testament to the lengths one man would go to protect his students. But for Eric Hainstock, the story is one of lost potential, a life derailed by neglect, abuse, and ultimately, his own actions. Today, Eric remains incarcerated, his name a grim reminder of a tragedy that could have been prevented. His story forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about the consequences of bullying, the impact of unchecked abuse, and the desperate need to listen to those who feel unseen. This is the story of Eric Hainstock. A boy lost, a community shattered, and a tragedy that will never be forgotten. The story of Eric Hainstock is as much about a single act of violence as it is about a broader societal failure. In the months and years following the tragedy at Weston High School, the community of Cazenovia, and indeed much of the nation, was forced to grapple with the uncomfortable truths the case brought to light. How had Eric Hainstock's cries for help gone unheard for so long? His story was riddled with moments that could have and should have been turning points. At home, Eric's descriptions of physical and emotional abuse were never properly investigated. The Department of Child Protective Services had been contacted multiple times, yet meaningful intervention never came. Eric was left in an environment that bred anger, fear, and mistrust. At school, the bullying Eric endured was relentless and well known. Fellow students later recounted how Eric was frequently the target of cruel jokes, physical intimidation, and ostracization. Teachers, administrators, and counselors all had opportunities to step in, but for one reason or another, they didn't. Whether it was a lack of resources, a failure to recognize the severity of the problem, or simple indifference, the result was the same: Eric felt invisible and unimportant. Even in the weeks leading up to the shooting, Eric's behavior raised red flags. His escalating frustration, troubling comments about revenge, and his growing sense of alienation were all signs that something was dangerously wrong. Yet, these warning signs were dismissed as typical teenage angst. The tragedy at Weston High School sent shockwaves far beyond the town of Cazenovia. For the students who were in the building that day, the trauma lingered for years. Many struggled with feelings of guilt, wondering if they could have done more to prevent Eric's breakdown. Others were haunted by the memory of Principal Klang's final moments, his sacrifice forever etched into their minds. Parents in the community also faced their own reckoning. They questioned whether they had done enough to teach their children kindness and empathy. They wondered how a boy like Eric, someone their own children walked the halls with every day, could have felt so alone and unheard. For educators across the nation, the incident served as a chilling wake-up call. How many other students were silently suffering, like Eric? How many other schools were unprepared to deal with the complex web of issues that lead to tragedies like this one? In the years following the shooting, Weston High School implemented new policies aimed at preventing bullying and addressing mental health concerns. Counselors were brought in, and teachers were given training to identify and respond to students in crisis. But for many, these changes felt too little, too late. Another aspect of the case that sparked intense debate was the ease with which Eric Hainstock obtained the weapons he used that day. A 15-year-old boy, living in a home where firearms were easily accessible, was able to arm himself without difficulty. In the aftermath of the shooting, many questioned the role of gun ownership and storage laws in such incidents. Eric's case became part of a larger national conversation about how firearms should be secured in homes, particularly in households where children are present. However, the gun debate was deeply polarizing. While some argued that stricter gun laws could have prevented the tragedy, others pointed to Eric's deeper issues, suggesting that his actions were a result of his environment and mental health struggles rather than access to firearms. After his conviction, Eric was sent to a correctional facility to serve his life sentence. In interviews conducted years later, he spoke about his remorse for what he had done. He expressed regret not only for the life he took but also for the pain he caused to Principal Klang's family, the school, and the community. Yet, for many, Eric's remorse offered little comfort. The loss of John Klang was too great, his absence too profound. Eric's explanations that he didn't fully understand the consequences of his actions, that he only wanted to scare the school into taking him seriously, felt hollow to those who had lost a husband, a father, a mentor, and a friend. Eric's life in prison has been marked by attempts to better himself. He has taken courses, engaged in therapy, and tried to make sense of the events that led to that fateful day. But the shadow of his actions looms large, and for the rest of his life, he will carry the weight of what he did. Cazenovia is no longer the same quiet town it was before September 29, 2006. The tragedy left scars that will never fully heal. Annual memorials are held in honor of John Klang, reminding residents of his heroism and the sacrifice he made to protect his students. But the community has also been forced to confront its own role in what happened. Many residents admit that they didn't see or perhaps chose not to see the pain Eric Hainstock was in. His isolation, his desperation, and his growing anger were not secrets, yet few stepped in to help. The tragedy serves as a reminder of the importance of listening, of paying attention to the people around us, and of taking action before it's too late. Eric Hainstock's story is one of many that have contributed to a larger conversation about school violence in America. In the years since the shooting, incidents of school shootings have continued to rise, each one bringing new debates about bullying, mental health, gun control, and the role of schools in identifying and addressing at-risk students. For educators, Eric's case underscores the critical importance of creating environments where every student feels seen and heard. For parents, it serves as a reminder to foster open communication with their children and to be vigilant about the signs of emotional distress. And for society as a whole, the tragedy at Weston High School is a stark reminder of what can happen when cries for help go unanswered. The story of Eric Hainstock is not an easy one to tell. It's a story of pain, neglect, and unimaginable loss. It's a story of a boy who felt invisible, a school that missed the signs, and a community forever changed by a single act of violence. But it is also a story with lessons, hard, uncomfortable lessons that we must confront if we are to prevent future tragedies. John Klang will always be remembered as a hero, a man who gave his life to save others. And Eric Hainstock will forever be remembered as a cautionary tale, a reminder of what happens when the vulnerable are ignored, when systems fail, and when desperation turns into destruction. In the end, the tragedy at Weston High School leaves us with one pressing question: how many more warning signs will we miss before we truly learn to listen?